Thank you. So hello and welcome everyone out there to today's webinar on COVID-19 and MedDRA. My name is Felix Mader. I'm the head of the medical coding group here in the rainy, foggy, cloudy south of Germany at Boehringer Ingelheim. And as member of the European MedDRA user industry group, I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm very happy to have Liz Thomas and Brian O'Hare from the Msso with me, who will taking care of the technical aspects of the meeting today. So Liz and Brian, a big thank you for that. Before we get started with our presentations today, just a few housekeeping items. First and most importantly, certainly, we'd love to hear from you during the meeting. So if you have any question for one of our presenters during the meeting today, please use the control panel of the GoToMeeting player to send in your question. We'll have quite some time at the end after each of the presentations to address and answer your questions. And we'll also have a separate Q&A session at the end of the meeting. So please send in any general MedDRA related questions as well, and we'll take care of them at the end of the meeting. Next, in case you want to get back to the slides at a later point in time, or want to view the entire meeting, the webinar again, or have a colleague who cannot join today, please visit the MedDRA.org website. The slides and the recording of today's webinar will be available there in just a very few days. Okay. So this meeting is organized, the webinar today is organized by the European MedDRA Industry User Group Steering Committee. A very warm welcome on behalf of all of the steering committee members, were Morel from the Lewis David consultancy, Uta from Bayer, we have Anne from Grünenthal, Barry from Terminologies, Jay Knight, very well known certainly in this community from the MedDRA MSSO, Claudia and myself from Boehringer Ingelheim. We have Martin, our steering committee chair, who's also going to present later today. We have from CSL Behring, we have Ian from Vertex, and Christina from GSK. Well, we'd love to get some questions from you. We would also have some questions for you. So we have prepared a couple of polling questions that we will bring up open throughout the webinar today. To start with, just a few very general questions to give you an idea of who are joining this webinar together with you, at least virtually. There's no need to switch to another platform or tool. It can all be done using the control panel of your the GoToMeeting player. So as soon as Liz opens the first poll, you should be able to, or should see a pop-up window close to the control panel of your meeting player that directs you to the questions and answers. So let's give that a try. Liz, could you open our first poll question?
Yes, I'm launching the first question.
Excellent. So the first question, and maybe Liz, you could share the results with us, is from where in the world are you joining us today? Are you coming from the very east, the very far, the very west of the world? From where in the world are you joining us today? Probably quite late for the colleagues in Asia and Oceania, but maybe we have a couple of them joining us.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. And now sharing the results. Felix, can you see the results?
I can't, I'm sorry.
Okay. So from Africa, we have 1%. From Asia or Oceania, we have 12%. From Europe, we have 65%. Latin America, we have 2%. And North America, we have 21%.
Excellent. So quite a few from Asia, despite it's probably pretty late in your part of the world already. So thanks for joining us today. The next polling question is on the type of organization you're working for. Please.
Okay, I'm launching the poll. And we're getting responses. About 15 seconds to go while it's open. I'm now closing the poll and sharing the results. And this is what is your role position from the drug safety pharmacovigilance category, 61%. From the clinical research and operations, 9%. Coding is 25%. Statistics, programming, informatics, or data management, 12%. And other, 6%. And I'm hiding the poll.
Thank you. Do we have one more, Liz?
Yes, we have one more. I will launch that one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. If you intend to create a customized query for COVID, what is your reason for not using SMQ COVID-19?
I think, sorry, Liz, I think that's the one for Judy, the first one.
Okay, somehow they got.
So let's get to that one. So we keep that for later. Can we bring that up later again after Judy's presentation?
Somehow the number 3 got.
Thank you. I think it doesn't matter. We just go on with the agenda.
Okay.
Doesn't matter too much. So coming to the agenda and our first talk today. Our topic today is COVID-19 and MedDRA. And as you all know, many things have changed to MedDRA, like anywhere else in the world. Many things have changed since the virus began to spread, not even a year ago. But also MedDRA was changed quite a bit over the last couple of months. You will certainly remember the re-release of MedDRA 23.0 back in April to add the first COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2 related terms to MedDRA. And it certainly didn't end with the release of the SMQ, the COVID-19 SMQ, just 2 months ago. So I'm very pleased that we have 3 speakers today who will present their expertise and insights, use cases from 3 different angles, namely from the MSSO's perspective, from the perspective of a regulatory authority, and from the industry perspective. We will have Judy Harrison from the MSSO presenting on the development of the COVID-19 SMQ. We will have Kendall Harrison from the UK Medicine Regulatory Authority, the MHRA, to present some insights on how they use the MedDRA terms, the COVID-19 MedDRA terms at the MHRA. And last not least, we will have Martin Menke, our steering committee chair, and his colleague Amgad Shabel, who will present how they used the COVID-19 term list for signal management purposes. As said before, please, whenever you have a question to either one of our speakers or a general MedDRA related question, please send that using the control panel of your meeting player at any time during the meeting. We'll pick them up at the end of the sessions, each session, and we'll, as said, have a general Q&A session at the end, where we will try to answer your questions, the general questions, or any remaining questions on the topics presented before. Just one comment on the general Q&A session in particular. Please apologize that we will not be able to address any coding-specific questions in this meeting today. So please keep those kinds of questions for specific coding trainings or other webinars the MSSO offers for coding-specific topics. Okay, so let's get started with our first speaker today, Judy. Certainly, Judy doesn't need a lot of introduction in this community. Definitely very well known, and frequent speaker in the MedDRA community. Judy is a MedDRA MSSO's Chief Medical Officer, and she will present on the SMQ COVID-19 development specifically, and also on the general development process for new SMQs. Thank you, Judy, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Felix, for that kind introduction. Just take a moment to share my screen. Just a moment while I open my webcam as well. Okay, online. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you, Felix, for the kind introduction and from the invitation from the steering committee to present in this webinar today. We're talking about COVID-19, and I would like to first of all give you an insight into the development of SMQs in general and contrast that with the specific development for the COVID-19 query, because that had some unique characteristics. Okay, sorry, we're just jumping ahead a little bit too fast. Okay, first of all, I'd like to talk about the collaboration between CIOMS and ICH and the MedDRA MSSO. CIOMS is the International Organization for Medical Sciences, and it's a non-profit, non-governmental organization representing a wide variety of biomedical organizations. And CIOMS and the ICH have been collaborating since 2004 on the development of SMQs. There's a dedicated working group for SMQs comprising industry and regulatory experts with specific MedDRA expertise. And the initial goal was to develop over 100 topics for various medical conditions, areas of interest to develop these standardized MedDRA queries. There was also an ICH advisory panel which approved topics for development as SMQs. And certainly the group and the collaboration as a whole has been very successful. As of 23.0, the March release of MedDRA, there were 106 level 1 SMQs in production. And actually, if we count up all the individual queries in the hierarchical SMQs, there are over 220, I believe, individual SMQ topics. So certainly a very successful collaboration. Now in 23.1, SMQ immune-mediated and autoimmune disorders was released into production. So that comprised a total of 107 SMQs that went through the CIOMS working group development pipeline. Now, just to talk about the new process that is in effect currently, has been in effect for about 6 months or so. CIOMS was very successful in developing a wide range of SMQs, but the development pipeline has slowed somewhat, so there was no longer a need to have a standing committee to be able to meet on a regular basis for SMQ development. So rather now we're proceeding to an ad hoc development of new SMQ topics as needed, and the MSSO is taking responsibility for that process. And we will collaborate in the development of new SMQ topics, again with the same group of regulatory and industry experts, bring their expertise to the process. Now, to go through all the work of developing a new SMQ topic, since this is all done on a volunteer basis, we do need a strong justification for developing a topic. So it has to fulfill a global pharmacovigilance need. It cannot be specific to one particular organization or one particular product, and have some regulatory importance. I think a great example of an SMQ that fulfills these criteria is the SMQ for medication errors that was released in 19.0. And I could certainly add the new SMQ for COVID-19 to that category. Now, if users want to submit a new SMQ request to the MSSO, they can do that through our online WebCR change request tool. And the command is add SMQ. So it's a request for a new SMQ to be developed. Now, the submitter must answer 5 questions to be able to justify the need. Demonstrating regulatory importance, applicability across multiple regions and multiple products. And they also have to answer a question as to why the current MedDRA hierarchy is not sufficient to be able to address that particular query. For example, if there's already an adequate HLT that addresses that query, that would not be a justification to develop an SMQ in addition. And it's very helpful to the MSSO if the submitter can provide a proposed term list. Gives us an idea of your thinking around the development of that query. Now, the process for taking requests for new SMQs is that the MSSO performs an initial assessment. Does it meet the criteria? Does it address the 5 questions that are posed in the submission tool? And then we take that proposal and we consult with the points to consider working groups. Instead of the old ICH advisory panel, we recruit the expertise of regulators and industry people on the points to consider working group to get input from their perspective on the validity of this new SMQ topic. So in that capacity, they help us in advising us to make the decision whether to proceed with development of an SMQ or not. Since this process has been in place over the last couple of years, we've received several new requests and reviewed them with the PTC working group. However, none of them met the criteria for development as a full SMQ. If we do adopt a new topic, and as I said, through this process, we haven't done one as yet, we would coordinate with industry and regulatory experts to be able to develop the SMQ. The MSSO's role is to develop the initial documentation, so that means looking at the literature, defining what the condition is, and going through MedDRA and coming up with an initial term list, as well as inclusion or exclusion criteria to be applied. We would follow the same process that we did with the CIOMS umbrella organization, in that we'd recruit regulators and industry partners with suitable databases on which to test that term list. And typically this is very much an iterative process, that we would find terms that we'd perhaps missed in retrieving cases or terms that were too noisy. And so we would constantly revise the term list so that it reliably retrieves cases of interest. And typically that would take 1 to 2 years. The MSSO then finalizes the documentation that you will see in the MedDRA files, the actual term list that goes into production, the SMQ introductory guide documentation. We would then provide a recommendation to the MedDRA Management Committee, and they would give their blessing for us to go into production as a fully fledged SMQ. Oops. So the SMQ now for COVID-19 was a little bit different. It circumvented the usual process in some regards. It went into production for 23.1 in September. It was the first SMQ that we developed outside the CIOMS working group umbrella. It was early recognized by the MedDRA Management Committee and the widespread MedDRA user community that we would need an SMQ for COVID-19, and it was the MedDRA Management Committee that approved development. The PTC working group obviously endorsed the development of this SMQ, which was done in very rapid time, given the expedited nature of having to get this SMQ out to the user community. So we developed the SMQ with regulatory and industry experts. Many of the people probably on this webinar, as well as the steering committee of the European Industry User Group, helped us in this effort, so we're very grateful to their expertise. This SMQ was a little bit unusual in that we did not perform any testing on actual databases. The terms that are specific to COVID-19 only came into MedDRA in 23.0 and now in 23.1. So there really aren't many established databases with a lot of COVID-19 COVID data that we could actually access and test. So we developed the idea of the inclusion-exclusion criteria and the resulting term list purely based on medical judgment, what we thought would be applicable in a query. So no testing was done. A little bit unusual in this regard. So this gives you a snapshot of COVID-19 SMQ. This is taken from our browser. So you can see the term list. It's relatively short in terms of SMQs. Some involve over hundreds of terms. This one is only 29 PTs, and it's divided into narrow and broad scope searches. A nice feature about our browsers is if you right-click on the name of the SMQ, is that you can actually see details about the SMQ within the browser. So you will see the SMQ description. This is taken from the MedDRA SMQ introductory guide. So it talks about what the definition of COVID-19 is. The source represents the key references that we used in developing the SMQ. And then importantly for users of the SMQ is the SMQ note. So before you start diving into using the SMQ, I think it's important for you to understand what the inclusion-exclusion criteria and particular notes for using the SMQ and what the expectations are from running the SMQ on your databases. Now, what is not included within the browser text is the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Those are contained in detail, as I will show you, in the SMQ introductory guide. So in addition to having a quick look at the notes within the browser itself, I strongly recommend that users go to the SMQ introductory guide to get the full documentation, including the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So the challenge, I think, of this SMQ is that there are a variety of different use cases. Many SMQs are simply designed to look in post-marketing databases to identify conditions of interest. But I think for COVID-19, we wanted to go beyond the traditional case identification, but look for other aspects related to the pandemic that might have impact on clinical trials, disruptions of clinical trial recruitment, be able to monitor testing strategies, including false positives, false negatives, looking at exposures in larger population databases. So this SMQ takes a little bit of a different approach to the traditional case identification. So included, we obviously have terms directly referring to COVID-19 and some of the key manifestations like COVID-19 sepsis, COVID-19 pneumonia, and so on. Then there are a lot of relevant investigation terms. And unusually for an SMQ, we include the unqualified test name terms, just SARS-CoV-2 test, for example. And the reason why we included them in the broad search is that if you have a test performed, it may indicate that there's a clinical suspicion that the patient has COVID-19. Negative test results are also included as broad scope terms. They might be helpful in the context of clinical trial inclusion and exclusion criteria and monitoring the frequency of negative cases in a testing program. You'll also notice some non-specific coronavirus terms and other general terms such as viral prophylaxis, antiviral prophylaxis, that are not specific to COVID-19, but we included them in the SMQ because there is this gap period from when the pandemic started in the early part of 2020 versus May, April 2020, when we actually added the COVID-specific terms into MedDRA. So in that gap period, users might have used these non-specific terms such as coronavirus infection or viral pneumonia as a placeholder for cases that do represent COVID-19, but the specific term wasn't available yet in MedDRA. And we also include terms for exposures. There was a lot of toing and froing when we were developing the SMQ about whether we should include signs and symptoms and complications, associated conditions of COVID-19. But given the rapidly evolving nature of the disease, we're still learning more about it. We felt that it was not practical to include all of those in an SMQ. Even those that are highly associated, such as the respiratory manifestations, hypercoagulation, septic shock, and so on, could cause some noise in data sets. We also excluded non-specific investigation terms and treatment terms that were not specific to COVID-19, as these might be too noisy. And similarly, in typical fashion with other SMQs, we excluded risk factors. If you look at the SMQ documentation in the introductory guide, there are some details about the potential applications in clinical trials and pharmacovigilance. So there are a variety of use cases for this SMQ. In clinical trials, you could use it to identify adverse events, indications for use, inclusion and exclusion criteria for clinical trials, as well as reasons for disruption of clinical trials. For example, a patient doesn't turn up to a visit because they have developed COVID-19. In addition, on the pharmacovigilance side, we could use the SMQ to record indications for off-label use. So if one of your particular products is being used to treat COVID-19 or to immunize or prevent COVID-19, we don't have any approved products yet for those, so you could use them to track indications for off-label use for your products. And lastly, on large population-level databases, the SMQ could be used to monitor exposures to COVID-19 and look at the frequency of cases, monitoring positive and negative test results, for example. Now, because, as I'd mentioned, there are some non-specific terms in the SMQ and the broad search, such as antiviral prophylaxis, treatment, exposure to communicable disease. If you cut off your data so that you're only looking at data in the late 2019, early 2020, when you're retrieving cases, you would exclude those non-specific terms. So if you're applying the SMQ, do a cutoff date of when this pandemic started emerging in late 2019, early 2020, so that you make it more focused. So in summary, the SMQ is very specific to COVID-19, can be used for case identification in the traditional way, but it can also be used in other use cases to capture information related to testing and exposures. And of course, you always have the ability, as with any SMQ, to modify it based on your particular products and use cases. And another strategy, since it is so specific to COVID-19 and we're not including signs and symptoms and associated conditions, is that you can combine SMQs to broaden your search strategy. So for example, you could use embolic and thrombotic events to look at the coagulation type of events that are frequently associated with COVID-19. Respiratory failure, toxic shock conditions. We even have an SMQ for taste and smell disorders. And just lastly, other COVID-19 resources. We do have a dedicated COVID-19 page on our website. Martin will be talking about the spreadsheet that was developed for the 23.0 release, identifying the potential terms that could be used in a search strategy for COVID-19. That was a bridge to the development of this SMQ. And for the use of users, we have produced for 23.0 and 23.1 a combined spreadsheet of all of the specific terms that were added to the terminology for COVID-19. So this contains obviously the investigation terms, the specific disorder terms, as well as a number of terms that were added specific to supply and availability issues of products during the pandemic. So I'd encourage you to look at that spreadsheet just to see the totality of the new terms that we've added. It's 129 new terms that we've added with the support of the user community. So thank you for continuing to grow MedDRA to meet our needs. Now I think I have two polling questions, if you will, Liz, and I think I've already got a little sneak preview of the question 4 that came up first, but if we could reopen question 4, because I'd like to get your input on how you're intending to use the SMQ.
Launching the poll.
Great, thanks.
And
so if you intend to create a customized query for COVID-19, what is your reason for not using the SMQ?
closing the poll.
Great, thank you.
Sharing the results.
Okay, I can see those. Yes. So the SMQ is too narrowly focused, 11%. And yes, I think it was deliberately designed to be narrow. Contains some terms that might contribute to noise, 27%. Yes, I can see that, those non-specific terms that we included in that gap before the specific terms were included. And the majority of people, 62%, you want to include signs, symptoms, and associated conditions.
Hiding the poll.
Great, thank you. And I think we have another one as well. So quite a lot of you will be customizing the SMQ. Okay, so the other aspect, if you are not customizing and you're going to use the SMQ off the shelf, as it were, do you intend to combine it with other SMQs in combination to include those additional signs and symptoms and associated conditions for a more comprehensive search? Just waiting for the results to come in.
Closing the poll and sharing the results.
Okay, great. Well, that's very gratifying. So that's a nice way of using the SMQ if it doesn't quite meet your needs and you don't want to develop a customized MedDRA query. You can use other off-the-shelf SMQs on the specific topics to round out that search. So 71% of you intend to do that. Thank you, that's very useful feedback. So now I'd like you to invite you to submit any additional questions to me on this topic. I will, of course, be available to answer additional MedDRA topics in general in the general Q&A session at the end. So I'm just looking in the chat here. I might have to crowdsource some of these answers from my colleagues on the panel, but the question is, if a subject in a clinical trial is diagnosed with COVID-19 while away from the clinic, there is no causal relation with the protocol or study drug, how should this be captured for pharmacovigilance purposes for case completeness? I'm going to try and answer that. It's been a while since I've been working in clinical trials and pharmacovigilance, but maybe my colleagues could fit in. I think if it's a clinical trial, then somebody is diagnosed with COVID-19, that does represent an adverse event. However, you could indicate in the causality assessment that there is no relation, obviously, to the study drug or no relation to the protocol, so it would be unrelated. Now, you might get a situation, and this has come up with questions from a number of users. Say if you're in a clinical trial and the clinical trial is for an immunosuppressant drug, and you develop COVID-19, you might be more at risk of developing that infection. There could be a potential causal relationship that because you're taking that drug, you're more susceptible to infection. So a way of capturing that information might indicate coding COVID-19 infection and relating it to the particular immunosuppressant study drug you're taking, and also capturing the information. There's a nice term for increased susceptibility to infection. So as a result of taking an immunosuppressant drug, you are more at risk of developing infection. So you may consider coding that in addition. Happy to take any other questions or comments from my expert panelists here, but I hope that addresses the question.
Just to support your
thanks, Martin.
response, yeah. Yes, I'm of the same opinion. It is an AE, and it should be captured, but the question of causality and all these other things need to be assessed in addition. But it is an AE during the clinical trial. Mm-hmm. So it's a data set in your clinical trials data.
Right. Thank you. And I see the submitter of that question has indicated that was helpful. So glad I was able to answer that. We have a coding question. And generally speaking, as I said, we're not going to answer coding questions, but I will talk about this one because it comes up a lot. We have included some combination terms of COVID-19 and a particular condition. So we have COVID-19 pneumonia, COVID-19 sepsis. This particular question is, how do you code COVID-19 ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome? Now, our answer to that is, and we have had specific change requests to add a term for COVID-19 ARDS. We're generally cautious about adding all potential combinations of the underlying organism and the particular clinical manifestation, because that could lead to an explosion of terms in MedDRA. And as our understanding of the disease evolves, we're constantly finding out it has coagulation effects, cardiac effects, renal effects, CNS effects, and it's not possible, particularly as we really don't understand the pathogenesis of a lot of these conditions at the moment, to be able to add those as combination terms in MedDRA. So the approach that we're taking right now, in the absence of definitive information about the links between these conditions and COVID-19, is to use the split coding approach. So one would code COVID-19 and ARDS separately. Probably not the answer that one would want to hear. Let's see. Do we need to add additional terms like SARS, isolation, and quarantine? In fact, we have added those terms in MedDRA. We have a term for patient isolation. We have terms for quarantine. So if you look at that list that we've provided on the website, the spreadsheet for 23.0 and 23.1 new terms, you'll see terms related to isolation and quarantine. Okay. Right. This is again another challenging question for me, and I might recruit my expert panelists to help me answer this. So it's from a regulatory standpoint, FDA would like to see COVID cases reported to them, even in the absence of a causal relationship. So that was what Martin was referring to. These are adverse events, even if it's not related to a drug or a protocol. We want to be able to track the occurrence of COVID-19 cases, particularly, as I understand it, for FDA in the context of clinical trials. They want to have a report from people about how clinical trials are being impacted by COVID-19. Just wondering if there'd been a discussion around this and if there's a reason EMA has not taken that approach as well. I do agree that per the definition of SUSAR and reportability, the relevant criteria has to be met. So I don't know if any of my European colleagues have further insight into the thinking around EMA. I thought my understanding from a quick perusal was that EMA similarly wanted to have reports of disruptions to clinical trials related to COVID-19, whether it's related to the product or not. Martin or Felix, any of my colleagues wish to jump in?
No, Judy, at least for me, I can't reliably answer that question. Sorry.
Okay.
Same with me. This is Martin. I have not heard any specific information there from EMA. In general, what I have heard people are doing that they're using the standard ICH approach until they're asked by specifically by an agency to do more than that, and then that is a question of your reporting rules you set up in your database or via your procedures that you would need to amend to follow this request from an agency, because you do, don't you?
You do, yeah, great. Okay, so consult with your regulatory colleagues and the agencies directly. I would advise that. Okay, well, no more questions coming in. I think I've reached my time, so thank you for your attention. I will join you back in the full Q&A session. I'll hand back to Felix. I'll make you presenter, Felix.
Thank you. And thank you, Judy, for that great overview on the development of the SMQ, the new COVID-19 SMQ, and the challenges that might arise from using it due to its either very broad or far too narrow scope. So let's move on and come to our next speaker right away. And that is for the regulatory authority perspective. Kendall Harrison from the UK Medicine Regulatory Agency. Kendall is the Pandemic Systems Delivery Manager in the Vigilance and Risk Management of Medicines division at the MedDRA. She has worked in the division for 10 years and previously been responsible for the handling and assessment of reports of suspected side effects as well as signal detection activities. More recently, she has led work streams for the WebRadar 2 project, which has a number of deliverables, including provision of mobile phone apps to low and middle income countries in a joint collaboration with the WHO. This work seeks to enhance reporting of suspected side effects internationally, as well as to deliver information about medicines to app users. Using the WebRadar infrastructure, she's now leading on development of pandemic systems to ensure that safety information is collected for products used in the pandemic. And Kendall, as far as I understood, that's exactly what you're going to present about in more detail on in a second. Kendall, many thanks for sharing us today. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Felix. If you can pass me over the presenter, then I can share my screen.
Yep. Just doing that. Should be able to present now.
It's still grayed out for me at the moment. There we go.
Excellent.
Great, so hopefully you can now see my screen. Shout if you can't. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be invited to talk to you today and give you a view from the MHRA perspective. So as Felix kindly introduced, I work at the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. Have worked in the Pharmacovigilance Department for most of my time there. So the discussion or the talk I'm going to give you today is very much from a pharmacovigilance point of view, how we've had to adapt over the last year to the pandemic and how day-to-day work has changed, and how the MedDRA list, especially the updated list for 23.0, has really helped support our ability to perform pharmacovigilance in this new and changing pandemic. So today I'll be talking about the reporting systems. As Felix says, we do have, I've been working closely with a WebRadar project, which I'll talk briefly about, and a lot of the systems that we're using to deliver and support our ability to collect information in this pandemic on medicines is supported by that infrastructure. We'll also talk about signal detection and how the MHRA has had to adapt signal detection for the pandemic, and how those processes have evolved as new information was received, and how we should deal with that. And also about the reporting levels and how we've been specifically affected by reporting levels because of the impact on the people that would normally report to us. So the first thing to discuss is the yellow card reporting site. So in the UK, our spontaneous reporting system is called the yellow card scheme. This scheme has been around since 1960s, back when the thalidomide crisis hit. And so we have a long established yellow card reporting scheme within the UK. We have, we developed a site, a slightly separate site based on the WebRadar functionality back in May, which is called the Coronavirus Yellow Card Reporting Site. And this was very quickly brought to life through very hard work from across the team in the agency to support our ability to collect information specifically on products used in the pandemic. We created a brand new site using WebRadar technology because some of our legacy systems weren't capable of asking specific questions. So these new systems were developed to enable us to collect quite specific information on the coronavirus, and that's where the MedDRA hierarchy and so forth has been really helpful to us. So this is the reporting site you can see in front of you. As I mentioned, it's based on WebRadar. For those that aren't familiar with that project, it's a project that started back in 2015 with an aim to essentially look at new technologies to understand how they can support pharmacovigilance. The output of that initially was a mobile app for reporting side effects and disseminating information and news to patients and healthcare professionals. That same infrastructure has since kind of built a life of its own. It's now that same infrastructure supports the yellow card mobile phone app, and it also supports mobile phone apps internationally. And likewise, this website is built on exactly that same functionality, which has really been very adaptable and exactly what we needed at the point of this pandemic. And it really shows that that project has been agile enough to allow us to support new systems very quickly and agilely. So you can see that a patient or a healthcare professional is able to report a side effect on a product used in the pandemic. We've expanded the list of medicines as more have been starting to be used, whether they've been licensed for that indication or not. And importantly, we were also able to enable device reporting, which in the UK was not something we'd built into the WebRadar technology before. But we have, obviously, because of lots of PPE, diagnostic testing and so forth, it was really critical for us to also have that aspect of the reporting to be able to collect information on those sides of things, which was really, really successful. We'll focus a bit more on the medicines now. So if you see on the right-hand side, we have new forms which patients and healthcare professionals can fill in. And like I said, this particular website allows us to ask particular questions related to COVID-19. which has helped us to collect that information consistently and with high quality information. So it makes that assessment step, once you get to the signal detection side, more robust. So one of the first questions a patient will be asked is about the suspect drug that they think they've had a reaction from. You'll see the second question here is asking whether the patient was taking the medicine for COVID-19 treatment. And we now auto-populate that if the patient says yes, with the LLT COVID-19, which of course is one of the new ones that was made available quite rapidly. We also have a specific COVID page on the reporting form for patients and healthcare professionals to be able to tell us about their background on COVID-19. So we ask them about whether they've had symptoms associated with COVID-19, and equally this maps directly to the XML, and this maps to patient episode history terms suspected COVID-19. If the patient has had symptoms, then we ask for things like dates, when the symptoms started and finished. We also ask patients whether they've actually had a positive COVID test. This in time might be expanded to specify which kind of test patients have had. We know that there are a myriad of different testing for different types of things and also different ways of testing. But for now, we have a standard drop-down list of whether a patient has been tested positively. And likewise, as Judy mentioned in her talk as well, having a negative test as well is quite useful information for us. So we collect that information if the patient has had a negative test or indeed an inconclusive or a void test. So we map that to COVID-19 virus test LLT and include the test result within the free text there. Again, we collect the date that test was taken. And finally, we ask about the clinical trials back in the early days when there was lots of products being used off-label and a lot of work going on in the clinical trial team. We were conscious that people using drugs off-label in hospitals may not understand how to report through clinical trials as well as they should be. So we had this in here to ensure that if people were reporting to us through a spontaneous system when they were in fact enrolled in a clinical trial, that we would still be able to collect that data. And we coordinated closely with our clinical trials teams to make sure that those reports were going into the right places. Obviously, if it was a clinical trial, then that information needs to be handled by a team that are qualified and specifically working on the clinical trial aspect. And we also allowed the patients to add any further additional detail that they had, and we did find a couple of people reported when they were part of the clinical trial. So it's a really important way of using the MedDRA terminology to pick that up. We're also really happy to be involved in supporting the patient-friendly MedDRA. So when the 23.0 second version was released, this was alongside a patient-friendly version of MedDRA, which we host on our website. So on the left-hand side, you can see a list. When a reporter reports through one of our systems, they can either enter free text or they can start entering some information, and it will drop down and provide them the MedDRA list just to make that more helpful for the reporter, and then they can select from that, and that codes automatically into the E2B XML. Clearly, the left-hand side it's got more technical language, and that's the full MedDRA COVID terms. On the right-hand side, you can see a much shorter list, which is the terms that we felt patients would be more familiar with and would be able to select from more comfortably. And this was really interesting, actually. We had some patient user testing last week, in fact, and they commented on how important it is to have those smaller lists. The terms you see on the left-hand side confuse patients, and they find it far too technical. But the terms on the right-hand side are far more easy to understand, and it's a shorter list, so it supports people actually using that functionality rather than giving up, I suppose, into entering free text, which then adds an extra burden for our team to be able to code that. So this is a really important aspect of that delivery back in the spring, and we're really happy that we were able to include that and collect that information from that slightly shorter list of terms. On the screen now, we have just a visual of the reporting apps that we have. So I mentioned that we've been working on a WebRadar project since 2015. One of the big deliverables we've had from that through working with WHO and the Uppsala Monitoring Centre is the development of a mobile application called MedSafety. This is essentially an app which healthcare professionals and patients can report side effects to. We also, as I said before, support news dissemination through this and things like watch lists, so people can see the terms that have been reported or the reactions that have been reported for given drugs, which is then supported with visuals based on the MedDRA SOCs, of which SOCs have been reported against more frequently for a given drug. So a lot of useful information there. And we're delighted this week to have delivered that to 2 more countries, which means that we now have, I think, 12 countries who are live on that MedSafety app. And it's particularly been launched this week because it's MedSafety Week. Hopefully many of you are aware that there's an international MedSafety Week that's been running now for the last few years. And that's, yeah, get involved if you're on Twitter or LinkedIn. Please share news about pharmacovigilance and the importance of this kind of work. So because all of the work that we do with WebRadar is linked to that same functionality, it meant that when we were able to create new COVID-19 forms in our website, we could also transfer that same reporting forms into the mobile phone apps. So rather than just being able to report normal medicines, side effects, patients and healthcare professionals in these different countries can now report against COVID-19, which fundamentally just asks those more specific questions about whether patients have been tested or had symptoms. And we'll do the mapping in the background of the MedDRA so that things like indication will be captured more consistently. This has been taken on by most of the countries, so it's a really big step in being able to support some pharmacovigilance of COVID-19 products internationally, which has been a really big, it's been a great thing to be involved in. Within these apps, we also support the ability to have different versions of MedDRA. So we know there are a few different languages which are supported by the MedDRA lists, and it's possible for us to then introduce those within the apps, which means it's just that much more user-friendly for people using it in different languages. So you can see in the middle there, I think that was Armenian, and essentially these are all the same questions, the same MedDRA mappings, but across different countries and different languages. And again, that really supports the consistency and robustness of the data that we're collecting, so that we know that it's easier to assess once we get that information. So bring it back now to MHRA in the UK and how we handled the reports that we were receiving. So back in spring, we obviously started to receive some reports about the products that were being used off license for coronavirus. And very quickly we stood up a weekly signal meeting. So typically we have a weekly signal meeting anyway, and also a management meeting to escalate potential safety issues too. In addition to that, we started a new signal meeting. We were circulating new reports to designated assessors on a daily basis, and we were having these meetings between, normally it would be largely the pharmacovigilance team would have these initial discussions, but because of the pace of the pandemic and the different teams involved, we were coordinating much more closely between MHRA teams. So, for example, the clinical trial team came to those meetings because they were on the front foot, of course, with delivering medicines to support coronavirus. So we stepped that up very quickly. One of the main things we picked up early on was more to do with compliance issues, and this was to do with patients worrying about the drugs that they were currently taking and whether potentially that might make them more susceptible to COVID-19. I think there were a lot of stories in the early days about quite common drugs potentially increasing your ability to contract COVID-19. So we were able to pick up on this and disseminate news and information in communications to encourage people to not change medications unless they'd spoken to their doctors. So we did pick up on some important things at that point. We were also involved in discussions at expert advisory groups, both within the MHRA as well as in the wider UK health system, which again was really important to kind of stand up those discussions quite rapidly. And in terms of the impact it had on our day-to-day business, we actually saw quite a big decrease in the direct reports we received. So if you can see on the graph at the bottom, if you look at the grey and the yellow bars, that represents patients, and actually patients reporting from January to September have been fairly consistent. They are our biggest reporter group when you consider them against different individual professional qualifications, and happily the reporting that we were getting from them each month was still fairly consistent, and in fact it looks like it slightly increased back in May and April. But what was worrying to us is that the blue bar represents healthcare professional reporting in 2019, and that was fairly stable. You can see it kind of peaks in April, but essentially it's reasonably stable around the 2000 mark. But in 2020, the orange bar shows that really rapidly decreased as the pandemic hit, which is no surprise, because obviously they were very caught up with the day-to-day job, and being able to report to us was obviously difficult for them. So we did see quite a big drop, an overall 14% decrease in direct reports. This was all fed back to our expert advisory groups and so forth. And we, to handle this, we were concerned that the reduction in reports might make it harder for us to pick up on issues, not just for COVID-19, but more generally in signal detection. So we liaised with our epidemiology team, and we revised our signal thresholds to make it easier for us to pick up on potential side effects and signals on a smaller volume of cases. So again, that was done very rapidly and successfully to ensure that the systems and the processes we have in place were fit for purpose for that given time. We are starting, I guess, to see a bit of a pickup in the number of healthcare professionals, as you can see towards the end of that graph. However, of course, we're now in a second wave, so we would expect probably that impact to hit again. So we're closely monitoring that and sharing that with our advisory groups. And for now, we'll keep our signal thresholds as they are to make sure that we're able to pick up on issues rapidly. And in terms of future plans for COVID-19, there's obviously a lot of work to be continuing to do and to constantly having to evolve. We're very excited to receive the MedDRA Smqs this in the last few weeks, which is now fully within our systems, which we use the SMQs as most people would for the signal detection processes. So that's going to be really important and really valuable for us to be able to pick up on those kinds of reactions in SMQs through signal detection. But also for data extraction, we do get a lot of requests for information from all types of places, and being able to pull out SMQ data makes it easier, makes it more consistent, makes it better to kind of provide that information. So that's going to be really useful, and it's really great to hear the details of that in your talk, Julie. In terms of future analysis, so we obviously have more and more products becoming available for COVID-19, and that's only going to increase, at least we hope. So we will continue to monitor reports through the yellow card scheme and the coronavirus yellow card scheme. We are also working on at the moment, again through web radar technology, the ability to do active data collection. So typically a lot of the work that we do is the passive monitoring or passive surveillance, which is our yellow card scheme. So where the patient or healthcare professional chooses to report to us when they have a suspicion. But we want to be able to collect more robust, I guess, solicited information. So we're looking at processes to do active data collection where we can follow up more proactively with patients. So that instead of getting just a information at a particular point in time, we can get more longitudinal data and follow up with patients for a time, especially if they've had reactions that might not have recovered. If we don't know if somebody's recovered at the point of reporting, then it's always a question mark for us. And it's hard to then be able to take action on those kind of longer term side effects. So we are very much looking into that. We work very closely with electronic healthcare records. So we have in the UK something called CPRD, which is our Clinical Practice Research Data Link. This covers 20% of the UK primary care systems, which is a really, really strong resource for us to be able to do epidemiological studies on. And for COVID-19, that's no different. It's really important that the information in those clinical systems is available for that research, so you can start to see how patients who've either had products to treat COVID-19 or just had the symptoms of it, what kind of longer term effects they might be having. Importantly, the electronic healthcare records within the systems of SNOMED, but again, through the WebRadar project, that was a very successful piece of work to map between SNOMED and MedDRA, which is very helpful for being able to compare data sources and data sets. The final thing that's not on that screen at the moment is some of the work we're also doing at the moment to help processing of the cases we receive, which is using AI solutions to do natural language processing. So it's quite a novel piece of work that we are beginning to explore to understand how AI could look at the narratives that patients or healthcare professionals enter into our systems. So often they do enter free text. And we're looking at ways to be able to pull out those terms and map them directly to MedDRA and to the XML, just to support the way in which that manual data step is done. But again, also it will aid the consistency with what we're mapping into MedDRA. So there's a huge amount of work going on, some of it quite new to us. But it's all supporting our ability to keep detecting and using pharmacovigilance in this pandemic, which is only going to get more and more important. So a huge amount of change to our day-to-day work. It's pretty unrecognizable from earlier this year, but lots of very interesting work. And again, the MedDRA side of things has been really instrumental to making sure that we can code that and collect that and perform our pharmacovigilance duties as well as we can. So that's where I'd like to leave it. I do have a couple of questions, I think, on the polls, if Liz, you're able to pull those up.
Yes, launching the poll.
So, question was, I can't actually see it. Have you seen an impact on your reporting levels? So question A was no change, B is an increase in reports, C is a small decrease in reports, and D is a large decrease in reports.
Closing the poll. And the results are?
Great, thank you. So 34% have had no change, 28% have had an increase in reports, which is interesting. 22% have had a small decrease in reports, and 16% have had a large decrease in reports, which is where we would consider the UK. We've seen, as I say, a 14% drop, which has been quite a big impact for us. I was quite surprised, I guess, from one side you could expect that there'll be a decrease, but also people are more aware that things have been given in a novel way. So I can understand that there would be an increase in some situations as well. We spoke to another regulator the other day who had seen no change either. So not surprising to see 34% also having no change, but interesting nonetheless. We've certainly seen quite a big decrease, which we're hoping to revert soon. Thank you. And there's a second question as well, if you can pull that one up.
Here's the second one.
So this one is about whether people have got new or novel strategies for pharmacovigilance with COVID-19 treatments. And answer A if you have, and B if you have not.
Closing the poll. Sharing the
Great.
results.
So we have 30% have said yes, and 70% have said no. So in terms of the ones that have said yes, I guess it would be interesting here or elsewhere to find out what those are. I think everyone's learning new things quite quickly, and different approaches are going to be really interesting in this, since we're facing unexpected and new challenges. So there's a great opportunity for everyone to share the way that they're achieving that, I suppose. So yeah, very interesting to see. Still quite a big proportion of you are doing new things. So thank you. That's the end of my talk, but I'm happy at this point to open up to the chat and take some questions if people have anything they want to ask me.
I think, Kendall, so far there's only one question at the bottom on the Med Safety app, whether that is live.
I can't see it, so if you could just tell me.
So the question is the Med Safety app live?
Is it live?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, the Med Safety app has been live for a few years now. So each year we kind of onboard more countries, and they launch at the point when it's convenient for them. But yes, it's absolutely live. And if anybody is interested, my email's at the bottom there and we can get in touch.
Excellent. Thank you, Kendall.
Great.
I think that's the only question we have for you so far. Okay. Thanks a lot for that comprehensive and great overview of how you're using the COVID, the MedDRA, the new MedDRA terms, particularly for your pharmacovigilance activities. Maybe one additional question from my end. You've mentioned the artificial intelligence work just as your kind of final comment. Your investigations on using artificial natural language processing to analyze narratives, case reports. Is that specifically for COVID-19 or as part of a general drug safety project?
It's kind of a wider thing, I suppose. But obviously, if volumes increase in pandemic world, obviously they're not at the moment, then it could be really useful for that. But yes, it will apply to some of the stuff we get through for the pandemic, but it will be a benefit wider than just pandemic related. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's certainly an aspect and a project many organizations in the world currently have. Many companies and agencies looking into that, how to get more from the free text reported information and to as one part of the story, convert that to MedDRA coding automatically. Yeah, a big challenge for the next years, and certainly a topic for many webinars in the future.
Yeah.
I think there may be one more question for Kendall.
Yeah, it just came in.
You could let me know what it is. I'm struggling to see the questions.
At the very bottom, can you see the questions, Kendall? Otherwise, okay. Then on the subject of signal detection, you said that you had to revise the signal threshold. Did you put the threshold lower or higher?
This is all. I'm not so involved in the signal, the precision and the so forth. We made it easier to detect, to raise signals on a lower volume of cases. So I don't know if that's the precision or the specificity version of that, but essentially we were raising more signals for manual review through those changes. I can't give you the specific signal algorithm output of that, but that's the fundamental outcome of it.
Thank you. And maybe one more for detecting a signal with a COVID, I think it's a COVID vaccine. Would it be advisable to compare data from other vaccines or from all drugs for disproportionality scores? Not sure if that falls into your area.
It's an interesting one, and actually at the MHRA we do already. Vaccinations are just compared individually, so we compare vaccines against vaccines, we then compare drugs against drugs. So we do split them out for disproportionality scoring within the UK already. I wouldn't like to say that that's the best way for new vaccines. There's obviously, we don't even know what the vaccine might be yet. So I can just say that that's what we do in the UK at the moment, is we split them out, but it's not impossible that we'll have to do some checking to see if that's appropriate for COVID vaccines.
Thank you, Kendall, again. So I think no more questions so far, as mentioned before. So thank you. That's the final question.
Great.
So if you have any more questions, please send them in, and we'll try to answer them in the last minutes of the webinar today. So let's move on with our next presenter. Presenters, actually. Martin and Amgad from CSL Behring are going to present the last perspective, the industry perspective in our webinar today, and share their expertise and experience in using the COVID-19 term list that was released by the Msso in the very early days of the pandemic, and how they used it for signal management in their company. Martin, like Judy, probably doesn't need a lot of introduction in this community. Quite well known as well, a frequent speaker in webinars like this one today. He's also the chair of our steering committee, who organized the meeting today, and in his normal business life, he's the global medical coding lead at CSL Behring. Amgad studied medicine and surgery in Ain Shams University in Cairo, and has been in the global pharmaceutical industry for more than 23 years, primarily in the drug development, medical affairs, and drug safety areas. He's worked for approximately 10 years at Merck & Co. and led all the Merck clinical research activities in the Middle East and Africa, before moving to Germany to work in clinical development in neurology indications at Pion. Then in the immunology, rheumatology, neurology, and oncology areas at MorphoSys. Since 2012, Amgad works as Director, Clinical Safety Physician in Global Clinical Safety and Pharmacovigilance in the immunology and transplant therapeutic areas. Amgad is a member of the American Academy and Neurology, European Academy of Neurology, Peripheral Nerve Society, and European Society of Immunodeficiency, among many other worldwide associations. So Amgad and Martin, thanks for presenting on the industry perspective today, and I hand over to you.
Well, thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone here. I'm just trying to share my screen so that you can see the presentation. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Good. So this is on using the COVID-19 term list in signal management, and Amgad has joined me to respond to all your medical questions and to explain the medical background on it. So we will be just doing a joint presentation, but first we have a disclaimer to make. The usual thing that it's our opinions as persons, and that we do not represent actually any opinion of a regulator or a company or CSL specifically. So our presentation is provided as is, and we take no responsibility concerning damages that may arise from you using it. And we definitely do focus really on the general principles concerning risk management and using this within the COVID-19 terms list, and you should not take any conclusion what CSL actually is doing explicitly. based on the information provided here, because it's definitely generalized to fit everyone's purpose more or less, and to give you the idea and not what CSL is doing. So the agenda is at first some information on CSL, so that you know what environment we are working in, just from the size and the nature of the products we have. Then the actually medical background on the use case we are describing, and then how we developed our custom MedDRA query based on the COVID-19 term list, some preliminary findings and conclusions, and after that we'll go into the questions. So please type in your questions. And with that, I just give you a short information on what CSL is today. Actually, it is the third largest global biotech company. We have about 30 billion, or we're working in a 30 billion industry environment, and we're the first in plasma therapies. We have a large influenza vaccine branch, and these are our products you see here, and this is specifically, interestingly, for immunoglobulins. So we do work in the immunoglobulin space, and that's really where this use case is located, more or less. So we have about $8.5 billion of revenues. So that's kind of the size of the company we are talking about. So we are primarily working in the rare disease area, and this is actually our platforms and therapeutic areas at CSL, and where we really do research in. So we're an actively researching company, and our platforms actually are plasma-based. We have recombinant products, and we're working cell and gene therapy. That's 3 platforms, but we are also in the viral space with Zika Virus, so with the influenza vaccines, but we're extending on that. So we're also working to support fighting this pandemic in various levels. This is what you find here, and that's just as many other companies are working either themselves or in cooperation to actually address this health crisis, global health crisis we are seeing here. So these are just our activities in this area. You see in the little notice that this is from April 2020 on the CSL website. You will probably find an updated version of late of October, just if you're interested. So with that said, so that's the space we're working in. Over to Amgad to talk you through the medical background.
Thank you very much. So what I'm presenting here is just an example of how we used the customized MedDRA query, which will be explained by Martin in the next slides. What we wanted to look at was Coimbative syndrome and the association with Ivig, which are the intravenous immunoglobulins. Some words about the disease. It's a rapid onset muscle weakness. It's actually affecting the peripheral nervous system, and it's sort of an autoimmune disorder. So the initial symptoms typically have a lot of sensation, change in the sensation or pain. It can affect also the muscles by having a muscle weakness beginning in the foot and hands, and also they might be spreading into the arms and upper body, and actually it's symmetrical, so it can also have both sides affected. It's actually based on a sort of a demyelination, a nerve demyelination, which, as I mentioned, as an autoimmune reaction, or also can even involve an axonal loss of the nerve itself. So during the acute phase, actually, the problem that this disease is also life-threatening. It's might have up to 15% of people having weakness, and this weakness can be extended to the breathing muscles and requiring mechanical ventilation. And having this disease actually affecting the lungs, as you see, and in association with the GBS, if you can go to the next slide, please, this might also create another big issue for those patients. It's the disease itself, as mentioned, it's autoimmune disease disorder, but as many other autoimmune disorders, you cannot really know the exact cause of the disease or the exact pathophysiology. But sometimes it was observed that these sort of immune dysfunction is usually triggered by an infection, which might be a virus or bacteria, and less commonly in surgery, or sometimes also very rarely actually with some vaccines. So GBS itself and also variants of GBS are conditions which are also known that intravenous immunoglobulins might have an established role in improving these conditions. And intravenous immunoglobulins or immunoglobulins in general is an approved treatment even for GBS in some countries or many countries, and recommended dose is 2 grams per kilogram body weight. This is also depending on the approval status in different countries. Now the next slide to talk about the question or another thing also, which is the Zika virus and GBS. So this actually what happens now is reminding us with what happened in 2015 about the pandemic of Zika virus, where also the Pan American Health Organization, together with the World Health Organization, published an alert about a possible association between some congenital anomalies or abnormalities and the GBS. And in another alert from the WHO, in March 2016, also it was indicated that Zika virus can also be a trigger or a cause of GBS and also leading some to some congenital brain anomalies. Why we're saying this? Because that's actually what we're seeing also with COVID-19, more or less, because now we've seen some cases of what we can call GBS triggered, or sorry, COVID-19 triggered GBS conditions. Now the question we had, and in the next slide, why we are doing this. So as I mentioned earlier, so we wanted to see actually a quick evaluation of GBS associated with the COVID-19 infections within the context of the use of IVIG. So looking into the safety database to see what cases we have received in a very short time frame, to see also, or to be able to have a sort of a preliminary assessment of the safety or effectiveness of IVIG in the use of this patient population. And Martin will go with you now through how this custom MedDRA query was used and how we have found some information there. Go ahead.
Yes, so this actually shows you how we built the custom MedDRA query we have been using. So you may, or this may look familiar to you, because that's kind of a limitation with why filtering just from the original MedDRA listing, the code listing, and the original is this one. You see just the big Excel spreadsheet from that. Actually, this snip was made just to illustrate how we worked. Very simplistic. Actually, we put in some filters. Actually, so we had a the table provides already a suggestion from the MSSO, as Judy explained, for terms to be used. Potentially, we filtered it because just technically for PTs, because that's the level we build our search algorithm on, and the green ones actually are the ones we included, and from the whole list from the whole PT list that was suggested, we actually only excluded one term, and that was quarantine, and that was really due to it being not a type of term we would expect in our database really be used and coded for these cases anyhow. But yes, that's how we built this algorithm. Quite simple from the technique, creating a CMQ. And we combined this actually with the existing SMQ. There is an SMQ for Guillain-Barré syndrome, and we used it in its narrow scope because we really want to have the diagnosis of Guillain-Barré syndrome and not symptoms to blur the signal here to some extent. So this is just what we've used, and this is how we used it in the database then actually. So it's been used to get all cases that have both concepts, so kind of the crossover sum where both algorithms would cause a match in a single case file. So and we have been looking actually in the areas of indications, adverse event, or patient's current or historic conditions to not miss any case due to data structural things. So this was actually the search we have been using, and over to Amgad for the preliminary findings.
Right. So this was actually covering a very short period of time. As you can predict, this was until sometime in August. So we have seen that there have been 8 cases which were retrieved in the safety database. Actually, 7 of them are coming from the literature for unbranded intravenous immunoglobulins. In general, it was observed that patients with GBS associated with COVID-19 may show rapidly progressing symptoms up to functional disability. Actually, some severe forms of GBS, unfortunately, and this was reflected in some patients who actually had, despite of the use of immunoglobulin infusions and the intensive supportive care, the clinical picture worsened simultaneously, both from the respiratory and the neurological perspective. In other patients, actually, also some patients had big improvements in terms of the neurological signs of the GBS, but also the overall condition of the patient was not that good. Actually, 4 out of these 7 publications were coming from Italy, so it was probably in the early stages of the disease. What we have noticed also that there have been no IVIG-related safety signals identified in this small set of patients. Definitely, this will need to be repeated. Actually, after the data lock point of this analysis, there have been also some other publications, one of them in the American Academy of Neurology about also the publication in Spain where patients improved significantly, having some manifestations of GBS after in a week time period, actually. Most of the symptoms actually were getting better. So it's a point, just we wanted to present to you just an example how we used the MedDRA query, how, and maybe Martin will talk about how we will do it in the future. There are a lot of other options to be used. We have also with COVID-19, there are a lot of scientific information, and every day, as you know, we have more information. One of the examples of the multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, which is also has been a sort of Kawasaki-like disease triggered by COVID-19. It's also a matter also that to be considered for some analysis. So it's evolving, and I will give the floor now to Martin.
Yes, thank you. So this is just to compare and pave the way for the future, actually. The algorithm we have been using, because that was 23.0 and we had the term list. Now we have the SMQ, and here you see a comparison of the SMQ actually, or the list, the term list is the SMQ terms, the narrow scope and the broad terms, so in version 23.1. The green terms are actually the ones that had already been there in the term list and in our algorithm, and actually the blue ones are terms which are new in 23.1, so we actually didn't have in the 23.0 at all. The dark blue, the dark green is terms that have been promoted from LRT, so we have had them in our CMQ for version 23.0, but under a different PT name. But data-wise, it was included. And the yellow ones are actually the discrepancies, so to say. That is existing terms added with SMQ 23.1, and these are the unspecific terms. And this is kind of the terms where we may experience some noise. Definitely, we will be using the SMQ in the future. We will be prepared should there be some noise. So that's why it has apple and oranges. We will compare and make sure we are not comparing apple and oranges. But as you see by these colors and the terms, our CMQ has actually, our custom MedDRA query has or is largely consistent with the SMQ. So we are prepared, but we do not expect any major noise through this. So that's kind of just a picture of this development. In conclusion, I think we can say that we have seen that that this CMQ has been effective for finding the respective cases. We do not have a clinical finding in a sense with that, but our methodology has been shown to be working. But the better is the worst enemy of the good. So now we have an SMQ, and with that we will proceed with the SMQ to use for the future type of analysis. But as Amgad already said, it's under development, the situation, the knowledge. So we will have to redo these analyses again and again as new information comes in, and we know more about the disease and the relationship to our indications and our products and treatments. Anything to add from the conclusions from you, Amgad?
No, thank you very much. I think that's what the whole message, and I believe we still have a lot of work to do actually in the future. Yeah, especially the pandemic is still there. So yeah, we hope that was over someday.
Good. I have to give, or we actually, Amgad and I have to give a special thanks to Susie Gabriel, who did all the visualization and going through all these cases and preparing for that. And last but not least, we are not drawing the data directly out of our database, but we have a group that is doing this for us. So it's the safety data and analysis reporting team at CSL who did all the reports that were required for this analysis, and will do so in the future. So that said, we also have some questions to you. And it's about what you are actually using. So Liz, can you draw up the questions, please?
Launching the poll. Okay, I'm closing the poll. Looks like mostly been answered.
Thank you.
And sharing the results.
Good. I can't see the results.
Okay.
Related to the question. I can see the results, but I can't see the question, actually.
Okay, I will read them out to you. Have you been using the COVID-19 term spreadsheet as a resource so far? Yes, 29%, no, 60%, and don't know, 12%.
So nearly 30% of you already have been using the term list because you probably had to do similar analysis to do on your data, and that's good to know. So the next, please.
Launching the next question, and that question is, what COVID-19 resource are you using or plan to use since the release of the SMQ? And the possible answers are A, COVID-19 term spreadsheet, B, COVID-19 SMQ, C, your own custom MedDRA query, D, none, and E, don't know.
Good, that's interesting.
And now I'm closing the poll. And the results are A, COVID-19 term spreadsheet, 23%, B, COVID-19 SMQ, 55%, C, your own MedDRA query, 21%, D, none, 6%, E, don't know, 21%.
So this is kind of expected already, isn't it? So the SMQ is your favorite, as it was with us. But there are pros and cons on it, and that rightfully, potentially led to some of you actually using or still the term spreadsheet, because that has been updated. So this is there, an easy resource for you to develop actually your own custom MedDRA query by combining it potentially, as we've seen from Judy's questions earlier, with other CMQ or SMQs for the signs and symptoms of the infection for various reasons. So thank you for that. Next question, I think it was 3.
The next question is, how are you using or plan to use the COVID-19 resources? A, monitoring spontaneous reports, B, clinical trial monitoring, C, none, D, don't know.
So this is kind of in the direction in what space pharmacovigilance or drug safety in clinical trials you need to apply it.
The responses are, how are you using or plan to use the COVID-19 resources? The answers are A, monitoring spontaneous reports, 55%, B, clinical trial monitoring, 47%, C, none, 3%, and D, don't know, 14%.
So this looks as if half of you are using it in spontaneous reporting, half of you in clinical trial, or actually you're using it in both areas. So thank you for that information. And from that, I would kindly ask you, or start, or give over to Felix to get into the questions and answers section. So
yeah, I think we, Martin and Amgad, I think we have one or two related to your topic right away.
yeah, that's true.
Maybe we start
Maybe
with
we
those.
take the first one. The first one is, was it known whether the immunoglobulin used could have contained some amount of COVID-19 or anti-COVID-19 antibodies? And I think that's a very good question, because usually immunoglobulins are based on supplying patients with further types and hundreds of types of antibodies, and COVID-19 or anti-COVID-19 antibodies could be part of it as well. From the experience I have, also from my colleagues in manufacturing and CSL plasma, I knew actually that to have anti-COVID-19 antibodies in the final product for immunoglobulins, it might take from 6 months to 12 months until you can detect anti-COVID-19 antibodies in the final product in the immunoglobulin area. Recently, also, I would like to say that there was, for just a few days or a few weeks ago, a publication also about some IVIG products in the market, which mentioned that they had already antibodies for anti-COVID-19 already detected in their products. You can also maybe check for that. On the other side, you know that there are a lot of efforts also to develop antibodies in a hyperimmune fashion or so to supply patients directly with anti-COVID-19 antibodies. But I'm sure that for the vast majority of immunoglobulins in the market, they will have these anti-COVID-19 antibodies maybe in a couple of months from now, I believe.
And I think there's another one. How could you provide explanations regarding how you conclude that no safety issue associated with the IVIG use was seen? That's a tough question.
Oh, of course, yeah. Can I answer this?
Yeah.
So, yeah, when we mentioned this, we wanted to give you an example of how we used the CMQ and how we're going to use the SMQ in the future. It didn't mean that we are making a full signal assessment. Having 8 cases is really a very low number to make any conclusion on safety. But the message we wanted to give that looking at these 8 cases, we did not notice anything which is considered to be a safety relevant observation or a new safety signal or anything like that. Of course, that's not enough to make a conclusion, and that's why we mentioned several times that we have to look at this also several times in the future, maybe also on a larger scale.
And I think the main message of this part is rather that the methodology we have been using, the algorithm, is working. It is retrieving the cases. You then will have to analyze, and we will keep an eye on this issue with further analysis in the future.
Thank you, Amgad and Martin. I think that's all the questions we have for you right now.
Thank you.
So we are in our final session, the general Q&A session. Thanks to you, both of you, Martin and Amgad. Thanks again. I think it's an excellent and great example for how the MSSO tools, in this case the journalists, can be easily or quite easily be used to improve and enhance your safety assessments and signal management, safety analysis monitoring. So thanks a lot for that. So, as said, we are in the final session of today's webinar, the general question and answer session. If you have any more questions on any or for any of the speakers on any of the topics that were presented before, please send them in now, and we'll try to answer them. We have Judy in the line, still in the line from the MSSO to support answering any general MedDRA related questions. So do we have anything coming in? That doesn't seem to be the case. Or...
Perhaps one thing, Felix, actually raised by one of my MSSO colleagues. Obviously, we did not conduct any formal testing of the SMQ for COVID-19 on any live databases, but we'd like to hand over to you now that it's out in the wild in production. And if you can give us any feedback on the performance of the SMQ, the specific terms, whether we missed any, whether any should be added within the confines of the inclusion-exclusion criteria. It would be great to have your actual feedback on the performance of the SMQ. We conducted a similar review of the performance of the medication errors SMQ, which was very informative after about 18 months or 2 years out. And as a result, we changed the scope of some terms, added some terms, and made some inactive. So I expect this is going to be an evolving query, and based on your use cases and feedback, we can continue to modify it to make it applicable to your needs in the future. So we encourage you to submit change requests based on your experiences.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just one question on top of that for the general SMQ request process, Julie, that came to my mind during your presentation. You've mentioned that if you were submitted under the new or new SMQ request process, but none of them was accepted so far. So is there some kind of general learning you could give out to users who want to submit an SMQ request?
Yeah, so
they should
it's a great question. We evaluated them with the points to consider working group. So we got industry and regulatory perspectives. I think they really fell in 2 categories. Some of them were incredibly broad. I don't want to give away too much, but very broad requests for addressing things like fever, a very potentially broad topic. Others were more specific that could be adequately retrieved using an existing HLT or HLGT. And some were so specific to a particular product that they wouldn't have wider applicability. I'm thinking of some of the new cancer therapies and particularly CAR T cell therapy and the specific neurological manifestations of that, very specific to a particular therapy and already covered by existing SMQs such as encephalopathy and so on. So they did receive a thorough evaluation from different perspectives, but obviously a lot goes into developing an SMQ. It can take a year or 2. So we want to make sure it really has a global need from a regulatory and clinical perspective to put in that effort.
So what's your top recommendation for users who are planning to submit an SMQ request? What should they
provide? A really strong justification supported by literature. That's very helpful for us. An indication that regulators are asking for this particular signal to be monitored. A term list, a well thought out term list is very helpful to us in formulating our assessment as well.
Thank you. I think, Kendall, we meanwhile got one more question for you. How will the Brexit impact the accessibility of your work for the EU?
So I guess I'm not really in a position to talk about Brexit. It's not my area of expertise. Was the question accessibility of? if it was around that, I suppose, I mean, we work in an international community as it is, so I would hope that we continue collaborating as we do with the rest of the world. But yeah, not in a position to talk about or respond to Brexit, because I'm just not involved in that area particularly.
And explicitly, WebRadar is an international collaboration, isn't it? So it is actually, even CSL as a company is active in that collaboration. And I know we have been very active the last year for the mapping of the SNOMED and MedDRA terms, with Judy as one of the key people there. And it's AFPIA involved and so forth. So it is international. So even if the Brexit has an impact on the activity of the MHRA within that scope, it is internationally, isn't it? So
absolutely, I think that's well said. Thank you.
So I don't see any additional questions. Do you?
Felix, maybe if I could just elaborate on your question regarding the request for new SMQs. This is all a very transparent process. So if you go into our WebCR tool and look up a term history, you can find the decisions that were made by the MSSO and the PTC working group for rejections as well as acceptances. So if a new SMQ request was rejected, we do provide information available to all users. Of course, it's anonymized who the submitter is, but all users can view the request, whether it's accepted or rejected, and the rationale for that. So if it was rejected, we would provide the rationale that it was already covered by an existing MedDRA query or an existing HLT. That is all transparent to the users. So if you're submitting a new SMQ request, you might wish to see if that request had already been submitted and whether it had been rejected in the past.
And even if not yet submitted, it will be a good resource of information, what to consider and take into account when submitting.
Exactly, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So I don't think we have any more questions open to be answered, and we are very close to the official end of the meeting anyway. But before we close, I would like to thank again thank you all our speakers today. Thanks a lot for sharing your expertise and your experience, your use cases with us today. I think in these challenging days of the COVID pandemic, it's even more important to share knowledge as soon as possible, as quick as possible. And as we started with, a lot of things have changed in MedDRA, so it's very valuable for the community and all of us certainly to learn how we can benefit and use the tools and terms, MedDRA terms provided in the dictionary for safety analysis and everything around it. So thanks again to you, Amgad, Kendall, Martin, Judy, for joining us today. I hope you all there, wherever you are in the world, learned something today. I certainly did learn quite a lot. And before we close, and last but not least, I would just remind you on the survey, which we are going to send out right after the meeting. So please take the opportunity, give us your feedback on the webinar today. And in particular, if you want to or would like to hear about a specific topic in the future in one of our webinars, please use the survey to provide that feedback as well. With that said, I'm closing the meeting for today. Thank you for joining us today, and stay safe and healthy wherever you are in the world. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.